What if I told you Gen Urobuchi, the man behind Fate, Zero, Madoka Magica, and Psychopaths, wrote an original mecha anime? The man behind some of the darkest anime moments that earned him the nickname the Uro Butcher had cooked up a whole new work. Well, for starters, I'd be lying to you because he only wrote the first 3 episodes, but the conversation of how much he actually wrote lasted for years after the show ended. But it's undeniable that just having Urobuchi's name attached worked on so many anime fans to get them to tune in, myself included. And for those who are still doubtful, we got to witness this scene.
I say cry, I say fire, I say rise,
And all our doubts are washed away alongside what is probably several million people, if not more. But what followed that was an anime that, once it lost, Urobuchi slowly began to tear at the seams until eventually it was consumed. But it's been over a decade since Aldnoah.Zero came out, and I haven't been able to get it out of my head. Every so often I think about rewatching it. The world seemed to kinda hate it, but I had enjoyed it for the most part. But finally, in the good old 2025, I decided I actually was gonna rewatch it, and boy oh boy, what an anime it is.
Just keep looking around. How do you find this world now? Exciting, I don't want you now. Oh, I can't right now. It's going on and on and on. We wait oversee the sky. Will love a prince for everyone. You can be sure I'll be back again.
この番組はグランドスポンサーの提供でお送りします。
Season 1 of Aldnoah.Zero is a fine mecha action anime. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it's consistently enjoyable. A large portion of this is thanks to Hiroyuki Sawano delivering one of my favorite scores of his. For all the issues I have with the series, the music is never one of them. It's so good that whenever Keep On Keepin' On starts playing at a scene, my brain turns off and I get lost in the excitement of the scene. But besides that, Aldnoah.Zero suffers from 2 major issues. The first one is the protagonist Inoue Kaizuka, a black hole of a human being that is devoid of any emotion or compelling character arc. And the much bigger issue is the second season's existence. Starting with Inoue, he isn't a great character in the first season either. He's the resident cool guy who's basically the only tactically capable character in the series, but this comes at the cost of being an actual character with depth. However, for moments, the coolness wins me over. I'll concede that. The fights in Season 1 work for me because I feel like Inoue is conducting an experiment. He doesn't know how to beat the enemy in front of him because they have a force field gravity manipulation or whatever seemingly unbeatable power the writers can come up with next. And despite just having his little basic robot, he works out solutions through trial and error until the unbeatable wall is conquered, and I think that's pretty cool. It's an interesting spin on mecha battles that are often just simpler tests of strength. And also it's fun to have the music pumping as he's experimenting with what will kill the enemy. But then he stops fighting and delivers every line like he barely exists or cares at all. He's there for the hype moments and aura and to be the good guy, and any other emotional thing fails to convince me that he genuinely believes what he's saying. Nothing ever exerts a strong reaction for him besides just being out in the heat of the battle. But to compare him to any other good mecha anime protagonist, he is sorely lacking in depth. They all have their moments where they're challenged as characters and have to navigate that. Inoue just gets shot and lies in a pool of his own blood, and somehow a Season 2 happened. Season 2 of Aldnoah.Zero is one of the biggest nosedives of an anime I think I've ever watched. It torpedoes a perfectly fine series into one that is grasping at straws and somehow still missing every single time. It feels like the writers lost the plot completely by the last episode of Season 1 and Aniplex said, "Sorry guys, you still got one more season to do, get back to work." To return to Inoue's character arc, I mentioned liking how the fights in Season 1 felt like him conducting an experiment and eventually arriving at the solution to beat an enemy. Yeah, that's all gone now, because Inoue got a cybernetic eye. Because it turns out getting shot and lying in an ever-increasing pool of your own blood doesn't mean death. It just means you lose any semblance of intrigue you had as a character. All the experiments that made the fights in Season 1 interesting are evaporated because the cybernetic eye just solves them before the encounter begins. Inoue shows up and he beats the boss because he just did the math in his head. And in a rare moment of my life, I understand why my math teachers were always so focused on getting me to show my work. Season 2 Inoue just gets a stat buff and lost any humanity he had and any intrigue he had as a fighter. But of course, that's not to say anything of the one other main character in Aldnoah.Zero that has an arguably more interesting character arc delivered in probably the most miserable way possible. Slain Troyard, he's the poor man's Kaneki Ken, which I'm really only making that reference because I read Tokyo Ghoul recently. There are definitely better ones. Season 1 kept him as a conflicted character who wasn't quite a true antagonist to Earth, but also definitely wasn't helping them. He had his own motives and is somewhat an independent agent. But Season 2 says, "Sorry pal, you're becoming a usurper." Which is an interesting development, but the series does such an awful job of getting him there from the beginning that I don't really like it. The only other really interesting character in Aldnoah.Zero besides the two of them is Count Sazbam, and really should have been the primary villain for most of Season 2 and just probably the series as a whole, but instead he's killed like a mob character like 2 episodes into the Season 2. It's the biggest throw the series makes, but it's a bed they choose to lie in. The problem with removing him is that every other opponent Slain has on his way to becoming the Count and trying to overthrow Earth is just pitiful. The rogue Orbital Knights are given an episode at best to kick and scream before they're written off or killed. There's the one knight who challenges Slain to a duel at the end of the episode, and in between those episodes I thought he got off screen because the next episode puts it off until like halfway through, and even then the fight lasts a few minutes before all the other knights we see just fall in line because they're like, man, can't fight the wave. But then at the end that same guy is like, damn, that's crazy, guess I lost, and just dies with all the other people. But it's like, sir, you were... I don't want to get into it, I'm pissed. None of the other opposition ever feel like anything close to an obstacle because they're all given an episode or two before they're just removed. Slain just gets to take a leisure walk into becoming a commander of a whole moon base. He does gain a little intrigue as Asylum wakes up from being killed at the end of Season 1 and he has to grapple with starting a war under her name that she very much didn't ask for, which in turn keeps up the problem of every major problem being solved too quickly. Because guess what? Count Crucio had a kid. And all of a sudden the series starts to change because we're in the last couple episodes, we need something to catalyze the ending. And he shows up, he saves Asylum from Slain and gives her the podium to say, please stop the war. And everyone is just like, what? What? I can't. And everyone just stops. Besides like a few of Slain's cronies who are just pathetic and get off screen because they're like, well, I'm gonna die for my king. And the like vaguely loyal knights are like, hey, the princess said to stop, so we're like just gonna chill. Even like yesterday we were fully content to just raise the earth to the ground without hesitation. There's no hint of a resistance and suddenly everything stops and is just fine. Which doesn't make sense to me and my brain can't wrap it around because so much of the Orbital Knights arc was that they just wanted to destroy the earth. Like the assassination of Asylum was just a cover. That was a plot by them to be like, I guess it's time for us to go kill them because they tried to kill her. But really this is the problem with Aldnoah.Zero Season 2 as a whole. Nothing is ever built up, it just happens and we keep moving. They load a singular Chekhov's gun every single episode and fire it 20 minutes later. Oh, Slain's shooting off randomly into space? Oh, it turns out that was just to kill Sazbam. Oh, there's a knight who's being classist against Slain? Just kidding, he's dead the next episode. Oh, you know his eye is starting to hurt? Don't worry about it, they'll still work with the plot needs to do. The grand narrative of Season 2 is made of tape and paper clips that are barely holding together under the weight of a writing team that must have thought they could make a series out of a villain of the week in Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Season 1 doesn't fare a ton better, but it's at least working on solid ground until the final episode of the season. And Season 2 just feels like they were trying to figure out the plot week by week. Everything else is tossed aside because they're using all their processing power to get to the finish line. And none of this is more apparent than with the side characters, who in Season 1 are already infinitely more interesting and compelling than Inoue and Slain ever will be, even if their arcs are just very simple. Lieutenant Mario's journey through his trauma is a good character arc of him coming to terms with grief and eventually being reframed into something he can use. The latter is really interesting to me because you don't often see that trauma coming back but for like a helpful cause. It's executed fairly awkwardly, but it's at least still interesting to see him, instead of freaking out on the battlefield, he like locks into his trauma and just starts shooting to keep himself alive. But then you get to Season 2 and he's just second fiddle to Inoue whenever Inoue is doing something else and we need a vaguely competent soldier, even though he probably has like no kills under his belt because Inoue has every single kill in the series. But Marito doesn't get any development, but of him and alongside every other side character in the series, they aren't made any worse. In a similar situation is Inoue's sister Yuki, who's the one character who tries to keep up a character arc in Season 2, but Inoue refuses to engage. He's the one character who is like, hey, maybe my teenage brother shouldn't be the main soldier on the battlefield, you know, he's just a kid. And Inoue's like, nah, I'm gonna keep going to war now. And the scriptwriter's like, nah, we need someone to kill the bad guys. Her pleas feel so hollow every time because nothing ever comes of them. Hell, the series honestly should have just stopped bringing it up, because it rings even hollower when like 3/4 of the crew of the Decalion are teenagers from the same high school. Like, I understand your frustration with your brother, but like, there were 6 teenagers flying the huge alien ship. And other mecha series have dealt with this, with the classic scenes where the adults are like, well, we can't let the kids do all the work, or are very adamantly aware of the situation they're in and don't feel good about it, and it's given meaningful time to be explored. But Aldnoah.Zero doesn't have that luxury. Instead, it has probably one of the worst cases of fodder characters I've ever seen. There's an implicit understanding in a lot of big war series that unnamed characters are probably going to die very quickly, but Aldnoah.Zero is engulfed in them. A new squadron is introduced for every action scene and are dead within the next minute as they are sliced and diced, crushed by gravity, split in 3, or killed in any number of very graphic ways. I understand on a writing level it's to set the stakes high, but the veil is so thin and happens so often that it just doesn't matter, and the series has also just shown that the only character that will do any damage to anything is Inoho. So any character that isn't named, I'm like, you're dead, I don't care about you. Because I know you're not going to do anything meaningful, it's just going to be Inoho's going to show up and shoot them when the enemy dies. All these fodder characters dying doesn't escalate the tension because by season 2, Inoho's already gotten rid of it. There's one point though where you feel like it for a second, it feels like maybe they're actually going to have some tension. During around the midpoint of season 2, the Orbital Knights finally have the bright idea to stop going down one by one and go as a group. And for a second I'm like, wait, we're going to have some tension? Are we finally going to have an actually good scene? And then the Deucalion just scoops in and saves them. And then Inoho just comes back later and counters all their gimmicks in the second fight. Which is just so disappointing because you're expecting them to finally encounter some semblance of a challenge. And then it's like, no, we're not. We're just making some hype moments so you get a little scared. And then we're going to dick them out. And then they're going to come back in and go, well, here's how you counter smoke. And here's how you counter electricity. It's just more of the same stakeless fights that end after we get our court order to keep on keeping on to make my brain synapses turn off briefly and enjoy the action, even if the plot surrounding it sucks so much. And if you start digging a little bit, you'll find a fun thing is that the series has 2 different writers and a 3rd uncredited one that I couldn't find. According to my anime list, Katsuhiko Takayama wrote episodes 1 through 3 and 6, while Shinsuke Onishi wrote 4, 7, 8, and 10, which still leaves 5, 11, and 12 uncredited writers. I couldn't find anything on them. But Takayama also wrote 4 through 12 of season 1 after Urobuchi left. I was going to say his season 2 episodes are better than the others, but every episode's pretty bad and I don't feel like lying today. He has script credits on other series, but I haven't watched any of them, so I can't speak to their quality. Shinsuke Onishi, on the other hand, has quite a few I can look at, and all of them are fine. He wrote some of Log Horizon's anime episodes, which is a show I enjoy, but I could not tell you anything meaningful about those specific episodes. And to be completely honest, the failure of Aldnoah.Zero Season 2 is probably just a rotten to the core situation. The ending of Season 1 is such a conclusive ending. Inoho and Asylum die, and Sazbom and Slain are left alive. It's pretty hard to write a second season to a show that killed off the only characters who can oppose you, and the only character from Mars who wants peace with Earth. Although I would be kind of interested to see how that show played out. Now to take a step back from Aldnoah.Zero for a second, I want to talk about a piece of art that is a striking resemblance to Aldnoah.Zero. It has really cool mech designs, one of Hiroyuki Sawano's best soundtracks, a battle for the preservation of Earth, and released in 2015, quite literally a month after Aldnoah.Zero Season 2 ended. And I'm talking about Monolith Soft's Xenoblade Chronicles X, a game that feels like the karmic balance to Aldnoah.Zero. I've been finally getting around to playing it since it finished and came out on the Switch, and it's just everything I wanted from Aldnoah.Zero and more. I think what kept Aldnoah.Zero in my mind for over a decade was how much I loved the aesthetic and the mechs in it. I just wanted to be in them and control them, which in turn was why Xenoblade X was a game I wanted to play for over a decade because I never had a Wii U growing up. And now that I can finally play it, I get it. The story's pretty good, albeit at the time of writing I haven't beaten it because there's a huge level jump for the final chapter, including all side content, and also like every other human being, I'm playing Hollow Knight right now because as of the time of writing, it hasn't come out yet. At its core, Aldnoah.Zero is a series that at best is fine and functional, but suffers from the third option of anime adaptation. It never looks like some of the worst productions have, but its failure stems from being written into a corner and then proceeding to make a maze with nothing but dead ends to try and escape killing off 2 of the 3 characters that actually mattered at the end of season 1. And yet somehow, despite all of this, despite finishing it again, I just can't bring myself to hate it. I wouldn't say I like it, but it's not the worst thing ever. It's kind of fascinating just how badly it shoots itself in the foot and feels like a great example of one of those how not to write a series. But in reality, I just can't hate it because it has a Hiroyuki Sawano score that I really love and cool mech designs, and apparently that's enough for me. I guess I'm just a simple man.